to introduce Des Ravenscroft, and I'm not going to talk about what he's going to talk about. I'll let him do that. But today is the 17th of August 2015, and our speaker is going to be talking about Morse code.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Des Ravenscroft. I've lived in Maylands for 20 years, and although when I was quite a deal younger, I used to come down to the Maylands dance down here at the town hall. I don't know if any of you ever attended that, but it was quite a good show. And we used to come from Midland by train and come into a certain bar on the other side of this hotel and have a couple of drinks and play darts, and then we'd go up to the hall. Now, I worked in Australia Post in the P&G department for 45 years, all over the place. A lot of country places, 2 cities, 3 cities really, and I've had a fair amount of experience with the Morse code, but I was quite glad to be asked to speak about this because it allowed me then to do some research myself. I was able to get some paperwork from our Morse codian fraternity, and I'll talk about them at the end of this session. What I would like to ask, well, there's 2 questions. The first one is, would you mind leaving any questions till the last? Because sometimes if I'm taken off track, it may take me an hour to get back again. But the other thing is, how many of you, if you could raise your hand, if you recognise something like this when you walked into post offices in the old days? So there's a number of you that understand a bit about Morse code for a start. All right, Samuel Morse. He sent a message in 1844 in America. Excuse me. Using his own code and using a system. This shows from Baltimore to Washington, and I think the next one up is the one after that. This is what is called a circuit, and these are the types of circuits that we used in Australia, all around Australia. With his, he started with something like this, where he had a key and a battery and a line, but up this end he used a small machine, and that recorded on tape, something like that tape. It recorded the dots and dashes. Then the receiving operator would look at that, decide what the letters were, write out the words. But they found as they went on that this pen that was making a mark on the tape, they could discern what letters were coming through. If there was a dash and a dot, they'd see it, but they could always hear the scratch, and the dash was always a longer scratch than the dot. So they decided they could take it off there. So they built in some sounders and stuff like that, and that's the genesis of all of our telegraphic circuits that we used in Australia Post. Now that was in 1844, and he sent a 4-word signal from Baltimore to Washington and said, "What hath God wrought?" I don't know why he chose that, but anyway, I guess he's talking about the miracles of sound. I'm in your way a bit, aren't I? So, that was in 1844. The system moved over to England, Europe, and various other countries. Now, when it went to England and Europe, some of those places were sending messages on undersea or underwater cables. And with the original Morse code system, there's a problem in that if you can't keep the power up of that signal over the whole distance, some of the dots just drop out. So instead of getting, say, an N, you'll just get a T instead. An N being a dash and a dot, and the T being a dash. So if we can go to the next, no, keep going. That is the International Morse code as we used in Australia eventually. Now, with the American code, which was the first one, of course, the C was 2 dots, a space, and a dot. And it's that sort of spacing, that space there, that would drop out, and they take a dot with it. So for whatever reason, the English and some of the Europeans decided they would change it and make it an international Morse code, and they changed what some of the letters were. So they have, in that case, that was the C, that's ours. Now, those are just a sample, so I can explain to you what was happening. Now, Australia introduced the system into Melbourne, from Melbourne to Melbourne Port. And it's interesting that most states went from the city to the port on their first journey, presumably because of they need to get details of shipping coming in, goods and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so they had Melbourne first, South Australia second, New South Wales, Tasmania with an undersea cable, then Queensland. So by 1854 and just after, a lot of the states had their own internal systems. In Perth, we had a gentleman named Edmund Sterling, who was a newspaper owner, and he was the one who pushed the state government to put in a telegraph system between Perth and Fremantle. But they didn't have any money, presumably. So they said, look, if you form a company, you can put it in yourself and you can get the revenue. So he had a ticket of leave gentleman called J.C. Fleming. Now, he was originally sent out as a convict because of a bit of swindling that he did in Scotland. But by then, in 1869, he was a ticket of leave. He'd been a teacher at one of the primary schools. He was also assisting Edmund Sterling on his newspaper. Now, he had already learnt the international code in England before he came out. So they put in the Perth to Fremantle line, and a couple of years after that they started going into the country. And it was interesting from my point of view that one of the first was at York. Now, it was just before that time, as I understand it, that our friend down here from Tranby, Mr. Hardy, had been granted quite a substantial amount of land at York. So he would have been very happy to have the telegraph because he could send all the details of his crops and get other information back. So it went from York to Northam. There was another line down to Albany and then Bunbury. Now, in the... have you all got your most recent newsletter by any chance? I don't want you to produce it, but have you seen it? Well, there's a excuse me. There's a photo in there of the overseas south-north line that went from Port Augusta, well, Adelaide to Port Augusta, which was already there, and then extended from Port Augusta up to Darwin. And that was carried out by another Scotch gentleman, and he had to try to work out the best possible and shortest distance. But of course, if any of you have been up in that general area or through Alice Springs and some of those other places, it's a very inhospitable place. So his first need was to find water, and that delayed him. He had 3 goes before he actually got through to Darwin. But when he did, just after that, in 1872, the undersea cable from Java came across to Darwin. So that meant that the whole, most of Australia was connected to England via the Java undersea cable. And that was a great advance, considering that even at that stage, Perth was still sending their mail and getting information to and from by ship, which, as you know, took many, many months. So, there you go, you've got everyone in Australia except Western Australia has got the ability to contact people overseas instantly. So of course WA wanted to be in that. So they had to start a line from here to South Australia, and it was agreed between South Australia and Western Australia that we would do a line from Albany along the coastal rocks and stuff to Eucla, and that Adelaide would come from Port Augusta around to Eucla. This is, I guess most of you would remember that railways in Australia, when you went interstate in the early days, you had to get off at the border and get onto another train because the gauges were different. Well, the same thing was happening, unfortunately, in Morse code. South Australia was using the American Morse code. Western Australia was using the international Morse code, and other states varied as well, but this is what we're mainly concerned with. So there's one there of keep going. No, keep after that one. Okay, keep going. Keep going. This one. Now, this was Eucla in the early days. There's a table there with X number of telegraphists on this side, which I believe were South Australian telegraphists. They'd received telegrams from Adelaide by the American Morse code. Then, see that little hole there? They passed that through to the West Australian people on the other side, and they sent it to Perth. Now, and of course it happened in reverse. Now that went on, strangely enough, for 20 years. It was just before Federation really that it was decided that all of Australia would become international Morse code. But it was, really pathetic, and of course you can understand that if you've got various ships, so there's 2, 4, 6, 8 there, 16, and you can double that just about because there'd be other ones that are off sleeping somewhere. So there's a lot of people in Eucla, and let me tell you, I've been to Eucla, and it's not a place I'd like to work very much at all. It's good to pass through. So, but by 1877, we had started that system, and we were in touch with England and European countries. So that was a great advance for us. In 1896, Marconi started his famous wireless system, and of course that meant that you can go from country to country by wireless, but the biggest gain was felt at the time was that ships could report to shore on when they were coming into the port. It expedited the transfer of goods. They had quicker turnaround because they had all the details of what was coming on, and the people on shore knew what was going to come off. In times of danger, when some of the ships, might have some sort of a problem, they could get in touch quickly using this. And of course, someone mentioned to me tonight that they had been tested at 10 words a minute on a wireless system, and I'll just give you this. That's the sounder system, and for the wireless, that's the difference. And but we both live happily side by side. The post office people could take it both by oscillator or by sounder. And indeed, some of our staff here at the Chief Telegraph Office in in Perth, used to operate from the OTC cable place down at Cottesloe. Now they were in touch with the Antarctic for a number of years, so we had telegraphers there. Some of them even went down to Antarctica and worked there as well. Now, I want to mention 2 or 3 things just to expand what the benefits of Morse code can be. The first, and with these points I'm going to make, I have some information here on big sheets of paper. If you want to have a look with more detail, I'm only going to touch on them now, but they are here and you can have a look at. 1917, Jim Darcy was a drover, and his horse fell and crushed him. He had severe injuries, and the only place they could take him to a station that was nearby, but they had no facilities for trying to fix him up. So eventually they took him on a 4-wheeled trolley thing with a horse, of course, but just a flat board, and he was lying on that in great pain. They took him to Halls Creek. Now at Halls Creek there was a postmaster who was Fred Tuckett, and he was a trained first aider, and he had some first aid equipment there. But when he saw this gentleman, he said, you know, I can't do anything for him. But he got on to Perth and got his, the surgeon that had trained him in first aid, got him to come into the telegraph office, and the surgeon told him what to do. And he did it with quite a sharp knife apparently, but he did it. And Jim managed to stabilise. Unfortunately, what they didn't know was that he had had malaria beforehand. And by the time this surgeon got a ship up to Derby and came across in a T-model Ford, by the time he got to Halls Creek, unfortunately, malaria had flared up again and Jim had died. So that was a great pity, but it did show that, you know, you can use Morse code for all sorts of things. Now, I was at Onslow in the post office in 1952, and does anyone remember what happened just offshore from Onslow in 1952? Something to do with a...
Atom bomb.
Atom bomb, yeah. The ship, the British Navy ship was exploded, and that was just off the coast, about halfway between Onslow and Port Hedland. Well, the West Australian newspaper, why they wanted to get all this detail as soon as they could, they got permission to set up, excuse me, set up a temporary post office and telegraph room just opposite at Mount Potter. Well, that's what they called it. And they had 2 Perth telegraphists up there, and they were able to operate. These are our 2 operators, and they were sitting in this tent and then waiting. And they were waiting, of course, for the big flash that was going to come up, and then the reporters would start writing all their details about it, their urgent telegrams saying it had gone off, etc., etc. And they did. I was in the Beaton Hotel breakfast room one morning, and all of a sudden one of the reporters dived through the window outside. So we thought, it's on. So we went out, and yes, that happened. But those 2 operators I should have explained before. There are two sets of circuits going up to the northwest. One goes along the coast through Carnarvon to Port Hedland and up to Wyndham. And the other one comes through the inland area, Meekatharra, Marble Bar, and meets just there. So what they were doing at Mount Potter, they cut the line so one of the operators could send it in there that way, and the one would come down this way. So they had two lines, and they covered quite a bit of urgent telegrams and press telegrams just in that small space of time. And so it was quite exciting, you know. I mean, when you're in Onslow, let's face it, there's not normally a lot of excitement, but that was great. In fact, one of the local wags there, I can't remember his first name, but it was Mr. Ross, we'll say. He and one of his friends early one morning put an open 44-gallon drum down the front of the Beedon Hotel and let off some gelignite in there. So, but didn't fare too well out of that. They both got charged. So the only other thing I want to mention really was about the system in 1954 of Morse. We were able to exchange places with telegraphists as long as we were both qualified. So I went to Melbourne for 6 months in 1954, and while I was there, I found out that every Saturday there was a supervisor and 6 telegraphists were taken out to the racecourse, and they set up a system of Morse circuits to every state. So when the race was finished, the first person would come in with what they call these Tate's Press urgent telegrams. Now these were urgent telegrams. They had to have priority. They showed the name of the horses, the first 3 horses, the price that they were paid, etc., etc. So they had to go first, and then after that they'd come in with these very long press telegrams that used to run through how the race was. And I don't know if anyone here used to bet on horses or so, but I thought the system was a bit strange. But you know, we went out there for the last 4 months of my 6 months there. Every Saturday I was able to go to the races. I could get in free. I could, if I was really quick, I could see most of the race, and then you had to dive back and be ready. But it was quite an interesting time, and besides spending time in Victoria, I also had a few 3 years over in Brisbane. Now, I was going to mention about the pubs, but I won't now. I think...
you're leaving the best bits out. You're leaving the best bits out.
Yeah, well, that was the time of the... what do they call it? The 6 o'clock swill. And, of course, we used to sign off on our lines in the Chief Telegraph Office at around 5:35. So you'd send the GB or goodbye to the distant stations, and then you'd race out and you'd clock off and you'd whiz down to the pub, which was handy. But I got sick of that after about a fortnight, so I gave it away. Just too much. Now I'm open to questions. Now I've, as I said, I've got some paperwork here. Oh, I know. Sorry, I just remembered something else I was going to do there. The Morse Codian Fraternity, 1996. All the ex-telegraphists and postal clerks who used to use the system, there's a number of us got together and decided that we would really like to keep this system alive, at least for ourselves, if for nothing else. So we started the Morse Codian Fraternity, and since 1996 we've been to various shows. We've been historical dues. I was just down recently at Fremantle about 3 months ago. We've been to the Guildford one about 4 or 5 times. The one up in 2J, I forget what they call it now. But anyway, a number of country shows as well, and we just give demonstrations. We have 2 tables, one with a complete set like that here, and another one down there. Now, since 2002 though, we have shown Morse code, illustrated Morse code, every day of the Royal Show, and we're still doing it. And we're welcome back each year because they get we get a lot of people coming in there. It's amazing that quite a number of younger people are really interested in how this works. So, you know, it's still alive. It doesn't go anywhere, I know that, but at least we keep the idea alive. And up until last year, for the last 3 years that I've been down there on the first Saturday of the Royal Show, there's been one lady with 2 of her children. And they come back each year, of those 3, and they send a message each, and they put it in here, watch them send, and then they race up there and pick it up. And so I don't know whether they'll be back this year, but anyway, there's a lot of interest. So if you're down that way at all at the Royal Show, we're up in the, I think it's called the Federation Building, just near where the big engines are. So please come along, make yourself known. That's about all I have to say at the moment. I'm open for any questions you might have, and also perhaps if you want any demonstration of Morse, I'm quite happy to do that for you too.
That's been such a good explanation, there's no questions left.
Well, there are a couple of comments that go back to history on this. One is a record of a newspaper cutting that was put into the Western Australia as an objector to the bureaucracy of birth. This is about 1880. He was a solicitor, his name was John Hall, he came from court, and he was very annoyed. Now, he was a respectable citizen, and personally, not knowing much about it, I was surprised that they were using telegraph, because you're saying how much earlier it was, so this was old hat, but he was a very respectable man. When he walked into the post office to use the telegraph, he had to write it down and then pass the note over. And would you believe it, they actually had the pencil tied to the desk with a chain, as if he was going to steal their
pencil. I must say, with good reason too.
He was furious. Yeah. What's got it? So, you know, imagine that. The second thing was, when I started in public works in 1947, there were a lot of excerpts in there. I was only a young 15-year-old at the time. And one I worked with was a chap by the name of Ken Capel. And he'd been in the Air Force. Located up at Darwin, and that's where they trained the Air Force people in Morse code. And this was a source of interest to us. And eventually he got taught, and he told us about the Dittar Happies. Now, the Dittar Happies were the blokes who'd gone nuts. And they would sit at the table going to that, you know, they'd gone completely off the hip.
You can get twitchy.
And they'd gone off the hip because of the pressure that was applied, and they weren't given much time to learn.
No, that's right.
But he called them the Dittar Happies, and I thought, never will I learn.
Not all of them quite that bad, but yes.
In the bush school I went to, there was only about 16 of us there. The teacher, the Japanese, came in to the war there, Singapore fell on that, taught us the Morse code, and I don't remember it now, but also we had to learn positions of flags and not only that, we were given some silkworms to take home and keep alive, and we used to send every week these cocoons away. They were to be spun for the silk for a parachute.
Oh, for parachutes, yeah. Yes.
My experience with communication was the days of the telex machine, which I suppose took over from Morse code. Did the Morse code symbols transfer into the telex system in any way? Or?
Not as far as I know, no. I think it was certainly signals that meant something to the excuse me, the terminating machine. But some of those machines, there was two types. There was a direct machine that went directly to the other one just on the line. There's other ones where you typed out, the tape came out, you fed that through, and that's
That's why I asked my question.
No, it's not here, so. Anyway, there's a different type of tape that it's there. That's one of the tapes on the teleprinter machine from Armagh, which they've got on show. And so that has all sorts of varieties. Now, some of the constant, the legs that were there in the telegraph room, all of their working life, they could probably read that in the old days. But you know, if you've got it already typed out for you, why would you want to read it? So,
I believe it was very handy in households when, if you trained your wife, you didn't have to let the kids know what was going on.
all right, that's the idea. Could be right.
Sorry,
Not a question, just some odd facts.
Yeah.
That originally when West Australian Airways had their flights from here through the coastal section through to Derby and beyond, they carried a Morse code kit, and they carried the wires to hook onto the telegraph so that if they landed somewhere that they could get contact with. And in my very early days with the airline here, you could still see the landing spots between Geraldton and Carnarvon. They were like a big L, which allowed you to have a landing in the appropriate direction for the wind at the time. And even, I'm not old enough to be involved in that, but the airline system in the 50s, the hostess, as she was allowed to be called in those days, because it was pre-PC, she was qualified to use Morse code because the position reports had to be sent by Morse code radio. And of course that, because it was basically high frequency radio, it got all sorts of difficulties with it. And there's one classic where somewhere between, and I think it was at Southern Cross, between Kalgoorlie and Perth, she was trying to send this message, and eventually she sent the message with, "I am continually being interfered with." Consequently, there was a little bit of explanation. That lady's name, I think, and you have to look, it was Marge Ellen Shaw, I think. Anyway, aviation has had that use until probably 1960, when we had to listen to high frequency radio, which is one reason I've got both ears tuned for electronics these days. Yeah, hours and hours of listening to hissing and crackling and carrying on. It might have been nicer if it had been Morse code, I don't know.
Yes, of course it would be. Yes.
Just wondering if you have any comments on Broome, as in Cable Beach, famous Cable Beach. Broome, the Cable Beach.
Yes, yes.
That was
That's, yes, Broome was at one stage one of the two overseas telecommunication spots. One was in Applecross and one was in Broome. But then they increased the number. They got the one down in Cottesloe later, but it was more specific. whereas the other two could be anywhere. The two ships in particular. So you get into Broome via the Broome to the ships that were in the Indian Ocean coming down to, say, Fremantle. They could be in contact with the Broome one, and the ones below, south of Australia, would be to the Perth one.
But was there another water cable to
No. Well, they use wireless. They use the Marconi's wireless system across, just in the air.
So it was able to be another water cable.
No, what? They didn't
I'm
have
familiar with Cable Beach.
the.
That I understood that was under the water cable base.
Well, if it was, you could be right.
It may
But
not have had
I don't know that one. I've always thought of the original cable one was at just out dark.
Yeah, it may be used. I thought the courthouse,
Yes.
what is now called what they know as the courthouse,
Yes.
was meant to, it was set
All right.
as for
That's
the
interesting.
cable that was going to come.
I see if any of our other boys there,
Yeah.
we have a lot of people who are very historic minded in our Morse coding group, and so they will always look up things for you. Anyway, Roger, that's it.
Are they still using Morse code today?
No, Australia Post finished it in around 1960s. And the ship-to-shore one, the wireless one, that finished in 1999. So by 2000 it was completely gone. There's still places that use it, but not officially in a business sense. It's just, well, a bit like us, I suppose. We do it to show people what can be done.
But you can't send it anymore.
No.
You can't send it.
No more telegrams. No more telegrams or anything like that. I suppose everyone in this room, just about of a certain age, would have had wedding or birthday telegrams and things like that.
Deaths.
And the letter
Well,
leaving in time.
yes, deaths were bad. Never did like sending death telegrams or delivering them.
You know, I had a real telegram read out at my wedding in '68.
Yeah.
It was typed up and delivered.
Yeah, well, there were some of those wedding telegrams that you really shouldn't have read out, I don't think, from the ones I've seen anyway.
She was a nice girl, I remember it.
I have to thank you very much, Des.